Good morning. My name is Eli Howes. Can you please tell me your full name?
My full name is Thầy Phúc. You can call me Phuc for short.
This is Phuc. He's from Vietnam and he did really well in his recent IELTS test. In today's mock test, he uses a lot of great vocabulary which I'll be putting up here. Please enjoy the test and let me know in the comments if you've learned any new vocabulary from this lesson. Now, when you listen to Phuc in this first part, try to answer this question. How long has Phuc been a teacher for?
Let's talk about what you do. Do you work or are you a student?
Currently, I am a teacher at IELTS Fighter. I've been doing so for the last couple of months.
Right, Phuc has been a teacher for a couple of months. He said, I've been doing so, working as a teacher that is, for the last couple of months. This is very good grammar for part 1 of the IELTS test. You can say, I've been working as a nurse for the last 10 years. I've been studying economics for the last 2 months. This is the present perfect continuous. We use subject and then have or has and then been and then an ing verb. So if the examiner asks, do you work or study? You can say, I'm a nurse. I've been working as a nurse for the last 2 years. Now, if you want to learn lots of very useful grammar and vocabulary for the IELTS speaking test, check out my IELTS speaking model answers. Go to englishprotips.com, sign up for free, and then go to model answers. You'll find model answers for lots of the most common topics in the IELTS speaking test. Now, each model answer has a video, a gap fill quiz, useful vocabulary to use in your answers, and a PDF so you can study the answers in your own time. Now, you can find the model answers at englishprotips.com. Alright, for this next part, answer the question, who motivates Phuc at work?
Who helps you most at work?
I think it's an interesting question. It's absolutely my head teacher who has, sparked the passion in me to believe more in myself and, work my ass off until I get, all the deadlines and work to be done.
Phuc said, it's absolutely my head teacher who has sparked the passion in me. So the head teacher at his school has motivated him. Now for the next question, what does Phuc like to do when it's raining?
Let's move on. Let's talk about rainy days. Do you like rainy days?
Why not? Vietnam is a tropical nation with the monsoon climate. So we have a lot of rain. Sometimes it rains cats and dogs, and I just love the feeling and also the pitter patter of the rain while having a cup of coffee, by the window.
Phuc said he liked to drink coffee by the window and listen to the pitter patter of the rain. So when rain falls, it makes this sound, pitter patter. If you get asked about rain in your IELTS test, you can talk about how you like to listen to the pitter patter of the rain. Great vocabulary that. Next question. What word does Phuc use to describe heavy rain?
Have you ever cancelled your plans because of the rain?
I think it's a lucky thing that I have never got any plan, plan cancelled due to the torrential rain or sometimes because of the natural disasters like typhoon.
Phuc uses the word torrential to describe heavy rain. This is the kind of specific vocabulary that can help you get a very high score in the IELTS speaking test. In fact, it's a C2 level word, which is the equivalent of band 8/9 vocabulary. So torrential rain is great vocabulary to use in your speaking test. Now for the next part, answer this question. Does Phuc want to continue working for the same company?
Let's move on. Let's talk about ambitions and dreams. Do you think you are an ambitious person?
Without a doubt, I don't want to boast about myself, but I think I am always keeping moving towards the top. Like I want to carve a niche for myself at this company to move up the ladder in the next few years.
Yes, Phuc wants to continue working for the same company. He said, I want to carve a niche for myself at this company to move up the ladder in the next few years. This is a great sentence. He uses the idiom to carve a niche, which means to establish a unique role. He also mentions that he wants to move up the ladder. So if you move up the ladder or climb up the ladder, you become increasingly powerful or successful. So for example, you'll get better and better positions within the same company. Now here's the next question. What job did Phuc want to do when he was a child?
What was your dream when you were a child?
This question, helps me become more aware of my past. Like it's reminiscent of my childhood, really. When I was much younger, I was having some kind of feeling of becoming a doctor. However, as times went by, I had a change of heart, and I like to become a teacher.
When Phuc was a child, he wanted to become a doctor. However, he said, as time went by, I had a change of heart. This is another band 8/9 idiom. If you have a change of heart, you change your opinion or the way you feel about something. For example, she was going to sell her house but had a change of heart at the last minute. Okay, now we're going to hear some of his answers from part 3. Listen to the next part and answer this question. Does Phuc think young people should live without their parents at some point?
Do you think it's a positive thing for young people, for example, young adults, to live by themselves at some point?
It's totally worth, separating from your parents when you turn 18, for example, just like what people in the West, especially in Denmark, they start living away from their parents since they, just like after graduation. And I think it's a wonderful thing to experience life firsthand. Although you can face obstacles in life, but you know how to figure out at the end of the day, you would be a much better version of yourself compared to the past.
Yes, Phuc thinks it's a good idea to live by yourself. He said, at the end of the day, you will be a much better version of yourself. I like the way that Phuc gives the example of Denmark. In the IELTS test, it's a great idea to give examples as it shows that you're developing your answers. So, especially in part 3 of the speaking test, give examples to develop your ideas. Now, the next question is, nowadays, do young people in Vietnam usually live independently or with their parents?
And so in Vietnam, do young people tend to leave their parents and live independently, or do they tend to stay with their parents for a longer period of time?
I think it's true that at one time, many young people, the majority of youngsters living in Vietnam, had the habit of cohabiting with their family the majority of their lifetime. The in thing now is that people relocate to different cities and live on their own in search of work and experience a new life there. And at some point in the future, they would see that their decision would be absolutely wonderful.
Phuc said that the in thing now is to relocate to different cities and live on their own in search of work. So that means it's increasingly fashionable for young people to live independently in Vietnam. Now, have you heard this phrase before? The in thing? It means the popular or fashionable thing. So, for example, you could say, deep V-necks are becoming the in thing for wedding gowns. Now, for the next part, answer this question. What 2 skills does Phuc mention young people should learn when they leave home?
And so when somebody starts to live alone or, for example, with friends and not with their parents, what kind of skills do you think it's important for them to learn?
I think the first thing springing up to my mind is the ability to communicate with other people. So communicational skills is of great importance. When you live on your own, you need to know how to speak with others, how to behave in public, and how to cope with situations that can be negative or affect life detrimentally. Another thing I think is the ability to manage your own time, as you need to plan ahead and stick with the schedules and try to not miss the deadlines.
Phuc mentions communication skills and time management skills. By the way, skills is a very common topic in the IELTS test. Now, if you want to learn lots of advanced vocabularies for talking about skills, check out my IELTS vocabulary course. In this course, you'll find a lesson on skills and learning. You'll learn words like active and passive learning, hard and soft skills, and you'll have lots of quizzes to test your understanding of all of this vocabulary, as well as PDFs to download the vocabulary and study offline. So you can start studying from my IELTS vocabulary course for free if you go to englishprotips.com. Okay, for the next part, answer this question. Which countries do many Vietnamese people move to?
Do many young Vietnamese people move to different countries to study or work?
I think it's a no-brainer to say that Vietnamese people are, keeping moving to different places in the world. They are immigrating to different countries such as the US, the UK, Australia, the Anglophone nations, for example, because they want to further their education as well as, experience a new life in a new country. I think it's totally amazing to see now people are so ambitious, in life because they want to make a difference to not only themselves but also the world in the fields that they are excelling.
Phuc said Vietnamese people move to the US, the UK, and Australia. Now, did you hear how Phuc describes these countries? He called them the Anglophone nations. Anglophone nations means English-speaking countries. It's an advanced way of saying English-speaking country, so Anglophone nations. Okay, that's the end of the speaking test. Phuc obviously did incredibly well. However, you know that he did incredibly well in all parts of the test, not just the speaking test. So if you want to hear his tips, by the way, he has 11 tips for all parts of the IELTS test, then continue watching our interview.
Thank you very much. That is the end of the speaking test. Right.
Thank you so much.
Very nice speaking test. And this is actually, this is our second speaking test because we did one last year where I gave you band 7.5 and then you got 7.5 in your IELTS speaking test. It's great to do one a year later where you've gone up a whole band and now, you've recently got 8.5 in your IELTS speaking test. So huge congratulations. What happened in that 1 year? How come you were able to go from already a very, very high score to 8.5, which is an incredible score? What happened? What were your tips?
Thank you so much for your comment. And it's such a pleasure to work with you. Last year I got a chance to talk to you and we had a conversation. So I think that to prepare for the IELTS exam, I think it's a good way that you focus on what you're studying, especially the content that you are learning. You need to make sure that it's up to the level that you're expecting to have in the IELTS speaking, for example. And I did quite a lot of practice with my friend in Australia. And we often call each other a few times a week, and we talked about all sorts of things in the world, even history, even, literature and Vietnamese identity and stuff like that, because my friend used to work in Vietnam quite a long time ago. So he got a connection with Vietnamese people, and we became friends ever since we met. We have become good friends.
It's good. It's interesting. I can really hear your Australian accent when you say, particularly the O sound, when you say like on your own or like go, like that O sound really reveals that you've really developed an Australian accent over the years. And it's very interesting that you say with your friend you discuss topics like literature and Vietnamese identity, which is kind of typical for part 3 questions, because you're talking about these abstract notions and your opinions. And I actually think your part 3 was your best part. Interestingly, because most of the time, part 1 is people's best part, part 2 is okay, and part 3 is when their score goes down. I think for you, it's the opposite. I think part 1 is your lowest, part 2 is good, and then part 3 is incredible. So that's interesting to hear. And it's probably because you've been spending these hours on the phone, or maybe even tens of hours or hundreds of hours talking to this Australian friend about all of these different topics. Brilliant.
Yes, you're right. Back then we were talking much about the macro topics, like the world issues, global issues. I mean, what happened in Vietnam in terms of the economy, and also the Australian attitude towards the world in terms of politics. So we were discussing a lot of topics that can be kind of difficult for some people.
Yeah, great. And and how else did you prepare for the IELTS speaking test? So you were able to have regular conversations with an Australian friend, but I think one of your strong points is your vocabulary. So I wondered, did you make a special effort to really improve your vocabulary, or how did you get such a high level of vocabulary?
So it's I think it's a good question, because many people are struggling learning how to remember vocabulary and how to use them in context. So I think I have dig deeper into the collocation. I mean, the lexical resource is one of the marking criteria these days. So I have used collocation in use from Cambridge,
right?
Both intermediate and advanced versions. And I have practiced using them over the years. Not to mention the English pro tips. I have watched a lot of your videos, like shorts and even like performances of other people, and try to catch up the vocab that they use in context, and you show that they're absolutely worth using, right? So I think those are some examples of what I've been doing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And soon people will be watching your performance and learning from the vocabulary that you've used in this test. So I love the way it's that kind of cyclical nature of learning and studying and improving. Now, I know you also did incredibly well in other parts of the test. For example, you got 8.5 in IELTS reading. How did you do that? What are your tips for IELTS reading?
For me, I've got like 2 topics about the universe and outer space, which are the topics that I believe don't play to my strengths at all in the reading exam in 2022. However, I believe in the power of synonyms and paraphrasing. Like, I have learned how to make keyword tables from questions compared to the words that appear in the text, in the passage. So drawing out what is what is being tested in the some of the books that I've used, like the Cambridge 10 to 18 or 17.
Right. And did you do a lot of practice for the reading test, or did you prioritize speaking, writing, or listening?
I think I spent equally my time on 4 skills. In terms of reading, I do tests on a weekly basis, and I evaluate my performance week after week. And you see your improvement, whether you're advancing or not, based on your results. And I do have one tip for students out there. you guys should redo the test that you have just done to get a much higher score before you move to other tests.
I think that's a great idea, because that's really when the learning happens. When you do a practice test for the first time, you're giving yourself a score, but you're not necessarily learning, you're just testing yourself. But when you do it a second time, that's when you're saying, oh, well, that's the vocabulary and that's why this is the right answer. And so do you recommend doing it immediately after, or doing it the next day or the next week or the next month? When do you think you should repeat the same test?
It's a good question. I think many of my students have asked me the same question. So sometimes they just remember the answers. So I recommend you guys do it when you feel that you can do it, like 1 or 2 or 3 days later, so that you can focus on the text itself rather than the answers that you remember.
Right. And you also got 7.5 for writing. What are your writing tips?
I think for writing, the best way to improve is to write, and you have your essays marked by experts, because they would give you advice on your grammar, your vocab, or your task achievement, for example. But before you can do that, you need to get the solid base of different topics, common topics, even harder topics like government and global issues. So you need to read a lot of articles related to the topics, and also research the topics that the questions that have been tested before, like in the past few years, so that you have the bigger picture of what is going on in the writing part.
Great idea.
And also one more is to write under pressure.
Yeah.
Many people struggle to write under 20 or 40 minutes. So for me as well, I finished my last sentence 10 seconds before the time limit. So for me, I do believe in the pressure that you face at home writing something, and it's a good practice to write under the time limit. You need to control your writing as well.
It's very interesting you said that it's important to get your essays assessed, and I totally agree. Now, I don't do any writing assessment anymore because I just don't have time. However, one of the main difficulties that students have is they say it's very expensive, because they need to write maybe 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Some students even write over 100 practice essays. If they're paying for every essay to be assessed, they're going to be spending a lot of money. Is there a way to do that for cheap, or do you think it's worth paying a lot of money to get your essays expertly assessed?
I think you need to learn very carefully the grammar and the vocab in context, so that you won't make mistakes. Okay, you get the control of what you're going to write, and also based on your research of different topics, you have the knowledge of different topics. So when it comes to writing an essay, you write under the pressure, like 20 or 40 minutes, and then you have some essays, really good ones, to be tested, rather than just write and you don't know the marking criteria is, you don't know like what the examiner expects from you. So I think it's good that you have the solid base of the writing test before you write anything. And when it comes to the writing part, you write like maybe 3 or 5 really good ones, and you feel that there's a need for you to check whether you have a high score or not, and then you pay for the service. Trust someone who is an expert in this field, so that you have really, really wonderful assessment, maybe from English Pro Tips.
I don't do it anymore. I know in the past I assessed your essays, but not anymore.
Okay,
but yeah,
it's fair. Yeah, fair enough.
But I think that's a great idea, actually. So maybe you write 10 essays and you say, these are the 2 that I'm particularly proud of. Let me see if I'm in the right direction. I'm going to pay for these 2 essays to get assessed. And you can learn about all of the 10 essays you wrote from how the examiner has marked those 2 essays, for example. It's a great idea. Now, moving on to listening, you got 8.5 in listening. What are your tips?
I think Yeah, the same is applied for listening. In terms of doing tests, you need to redo the test until you get a higher score. But way before that, for those who are, maybe beginners or who are just new to the IELTS exam, you need to know the format, what is going to be tested as well. Like it's important to get some tips from English Pro Tips, for example, in terms of listening. I have seen your wonderful videos about listening as well. So I think it's a great source of knowledge for people. But for me, from my own experience, to get to that high level, I think it's important that you stick to your plan. Like make it an intensive part of your life to, immerse yourself in the listening part, because at the end of the book, you have the transcripts so that you guys can check what has been recorded, right? And you know, like the pronunciation, the vocabulary, and even you can learn a lot from the part 1 to part 4 sections transcripts, and dig deeper into it and use it in context later and become a better speaker as well.
Brilliant. Great advice. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this wonderful knowledge. And once again, huge congratulations for getting such an amazing IELTS score. Now, I know that you yourself are a teacher. Would you mind if people get in contact with you who have watched this video? Is that okay?
Absolutely. If you have any questions or if you need any assistance from me, I'm more than happy to help you guys. And I'm really proud to have worked in IELTS Fighter, one of the biggest English centers for IELTS in Vietnam.
So what's
we
the
have
best way
up to
to contact
100
you?
centers across the nation.
Wow, huge. So what's the best way for them to contact you? Email or just to get in contact with IELTS Fighter?
You guys can contact me through my emails, and I will leave the emails and information to English Pro Tips.
Okay, great. So I'll put a link to that in the description below this video. Thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Goodbye.
Bye then.